fans? It's your main man, Made Man, back at it again. Y'all know how I get down over here. We talking boxing. Now, I'm going to need y'all to bear with me here because I'm about to delve into something that is very deeper than me and you, all of us, know about. You know what I mean? I am about to dive into the curious case of Andre Ward, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we know when you were little and your mama always told you to eat your vegetables because they were good for you, but they were nasty as shit to you as a kid. You know, even though they were good for us, we hated them. We did not like them. We did not want to eat them. I equivalent that to Andre Ward. Andre Ward is exactly what boxing needs, ladies and gentlemen. He is a great person. He is a great role model, almost, if you might want to say, for the younger generation to look up to. Not the Adrian Broners, not the fucking Floyd Mayweathers, but Andre Ward, who's a family man, who's a man of faith and doesn't run away from that, who's not a man who throws around money all flamboyant like, you know what I mean? He's not a man who talks shit, who's a class act, who shows respect to his opponents. This is the type of man that, honestly, we should be embracing, I guess, in boxing, you know what I'm saying? But the fact of the matter is, that's not the case with Andre Ward. Andre Ward is a 27-0 fighter with 14 knockouts. The man has never lost, you know what I'm saying? This is a man who's been through, who's dominated the last five, the next five of the next nine that's ranked under him, ladies and gentlemen. He's always performed very, very well in the ring. I mean, this is also a man who is the #2 pound-for-pound fighter in the entire world, second only to Floyd Money Mayweather. He is exactly what boxing needs. He's a clean fighter, ladies and gentlemen. But he is not, for some crazy reason, embraced beyond the state of California, it seems. I mean, if you walk around to most casuals and you drop the name Andre Ward, they're going to look at you crazy. If you're not a diehard fan almost, you don't know who the fuck Andre Ward is. And that is sad. I don't know if that's a problem on him or his promotional company. I'm going to try to divide this video, ladies and gentlemen, into two parts. First, I'll deal with Andre Ward inside of the ring, and then we'll go to his outside of the ring shit. So bear with me here because that shit is fucking confusing and it's a goddamn headache. My head is spinning off that shit. But we all know that Andre Ward is the most recent United States gold medalist in the Olympics, ladies and gentlemen. As recent as 2004, in which he won it in Athens, Greece. You know what I mean? He is a 10-year amateur and a 10-year professional fighter, but in 20 years, the man has only made $10 million. I say that lightly, but $10 million in his entire career, ladies and gentlemen. His last fight against Edwin Rodriguez is the most he's ever been paid in any fight, which was $2 million, ladies and gentlemen. Floyd Money Mayweather, who's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, ladies and gentlemen, made $41.5 guaranteed money in the Canelo fight, as well as over $100 million in pay-per-view revenue, ladies and gentlemen. So that's well over $150 million that Floyd made in one fight, and he's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. What is going wrong for Andre Ward, ladies and gentlemen? This is a man who entered into the Super 6 tournament, a tournament that was made to bring the European boxers to the American shores, ladies and gentlemen, and make them superstars. And they were using the likes of Andre Ward and Jermaine Taylor and all those guys to do such. But however, Andre Ward rose up above all that bullshit and became the stop plug for all of that shit. He shut that tournament down. He was not supposed to win that tournament. Do we not understand that, ladies and gentlemen? This was a tournament that was laid out for Mikhail Kessler, that was laid out for the Carl Froches or the Arthur Abrams, in which Andre Ward defeated all of them. You know what I mean? Starting with Mikhail Kessler, November 2009, if I recall. Mikhail Kessler, who at the time was the WBA super middleweight champion, lost to Andre Ward. Andre Ward, the fight was stopped, if I recall correct. The fight was stopped due to cuts, in which Kessler was complaining from headbutts of Andre Ward. So in the 11th round, due to the cuts, it went to the scorecards, in which Andre Ward won as a unanimous decision, ladies and gentlemen. Then he turned around Jermaine Taylor, who dropped out of the fight. So it turns out that Andre Ward had to take on Alan Green, and this went down in June 19th of 2010, if I'm correct. Yeah, that went down June 19th of 2010, and when he beat Alan Green. Then he turned around after that. Andre Dirrell drops out of the fight with Andre Ward. So Ward goes on to fight Sakio Bika. Sakio Bika at the time, a top 10 ranked contender in the super middleweight division. Likewise for Jermaine Taylor, and also likewise for Mikhail Kessler. After that fight, Andre Ward goes to fight Arthur Abrams. Arthur Abrams at the time, a top 10 ranked super middleweight fighter, in which Andre Ward beat him by unanimous decision, set out a round, comes back December 17th of 2011, faces Carl Froch in a very, very good contested match, in which Ward pretty much dominated the first half of that fight, eased up one towards the end, but pulled out enough for the victory, in which he took Carl Froch's WBC championship belt from Carl Froch, as well as for the vacated Ring Magazine title, and also Andre Ward's WBA super middleweight championship was on the line as well. So there was 3 belts on the line in that fight, in which Andre Ward won, and won marvelously, ladies and gentlemen. Not to mention, you know what I mean, prior to that fight, ladies and gentlemen, Andre Ward had fought credible opponents at the time. I mean, he fought... Sorry for the technical difficulties there. But yeah, back to what I was saying. Prior to the Super 6, ladies and gentlemen, Andre Ward fought the likes of Roger Cantrell, whom was undefeated at the time. He fought Andy Coley, whom was a top-ranked contender at the time as well. And this was before the Super 6, ladies and gentlemen. So the man has an impressive resume, and I think he was, at the time, especially back then, was well deserving of the #2 pound-for-pound spot in, under Floyd Mayweather. Now, after the Froch fight, Ward laid off for roughly a year due to the fact he said he damaged his hand during the Super 6 tournament. So after the Froch fight, he fought Chad Dawson. He fought Carl Froch December 17th of 2011 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And then a year later, September of 2012, is when he fought Chad Dawson. Chad Dawson at the time was a light heavyweight, but yet the light heavyweight division was fucking dead as fucking dead. You know what I mean? So he decided to come down and challenge Andre Ward. You know what I mean? Now, at the time, he lost to Andre Ward, and he lost in almost embarrassing fashion, because the fact is, Andre Ward beat that man so bad that he looked over to the ref and told him, "Hey, I'm done. I'm finished. It's over." These are the words, ladies and gentlemen, of Chad Dawson. It's over. I'm finished. I'm done. 10th round, ladies and gentlemen. Quit on Andre Ward. This is after a year layover, ladies and gentlemen, due to the bad hand. And this is what kind of starts to go downhill for Andre Ward. Also, after that Chad Dawson fight, we didn't see Andre Ward back into the ring until 14 months later, ladies and gentlemen. 14 months later. I guess the WBC at the time, you know what I mean, I guess they became very impatient with Andre Ward, and they stripped him of his titles in March of 2013, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Andre Ward tried to fight the WBC and tell them, hey, I could have still defended my title in the time y'all allotted me to defend it, but however, he still lost that fight, ladies and gentlemen, and he ended up stripped of his WBC super middleweight title, but he still retains the Ring Magazine title, which I don't know how much that's worth, but he also retains the WBA super middleweight championship as well. So this is a man who's has a lot of accomplishments inside of the ring, ladies and gentlemen. So you got to ask yourself, how is a man with so many accomplishments inside of the ring, even though he was lack of fighting due to, I guess he was trying to nurse his injuries. I mean, I totally get it, but how does a man who was so much success inside of the ring, who should know the fight game in and out, has such bad success outside of the ring, ladies and gentlemen? Wow, a lot of people say that, the stigma that sticks with Andre Ward, like I told you earlier in the video, is that, a lot of casuals don't know who he is. If you're not a diehard fan, you don't know who Andre Ward is. He doesn't fight outside of California, ladies and gentlemen. Andre Ward is an Oakland native, so, most of his fights have occurred in California. Now, a lot of fighters are looking at that like, hey, we don't want to go to California and fight Andre Ward. We want to go to the big arenas, to the big markets. Andre Ward, for some reason, does not fight outside of California. He would rather stay in that state, fight at those little arenas, and basically is only known amongst Californians. You know what I mean? Not known to most of the boxing world, which you would have thought that the Super 6 would have brought him such notoriety at the time, which I possibly did. But after the Froch fight and after the Dawson fight, which in my opinion was the 2 biggest fights of his career, he couldn't capitalize off the momentum due to injuries after both fights. So how frustrated are you if you're Andre Ward? I mean, you get a hand injury after the Froch fight, and then you get the shoulder injury after the Dawson fight, which causes you to lay off 14 months, stripped of your title. We don't see him back in the ring until November of 2013, which was against Edwin Rodriguez. And at the time, like I told you before, Edwin Rodriguez was his biggest payday, in which he also had to take less money to give to Evan Rodriguez, who was bitching about the purse, if you recall that fight. So $2 million, though, is all Andre Ward has made that fight. He's only made $10 million in his career. That's fucking insane for the number 2 pound-for-pound guy, you know what I mean? What the hell mistakes is this man making? What is going on outside of the ring? Now, this, where, to me, it gets a bit complicated, okay? Because this shit is really fucking sad. Evidently, if you recall, Andre Ward, he stepped into boxing in 2004. When he stepped into boxing in 2004, he aligned himself with Dan Goossen and his promotional company, which is called Goossen Tudor Promotions, ladies and gentlemen. Now, he aligned himself for a good 5-year deal in 2004. This 2004 deal was supposed to carry him into 2009, ladies and gentlemen, in which in 2009, before the last fight of the last contract, he extended his contract for another deal in which, I believe in this deal, was supposed to be for, this is 2009, this was supposed to be for, I believe, a 3-fight deal, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on, do not quote me on this, ladies and gentlemen. A 5-bout deal. I'm sorry, his second deal was for a 5-bout deal. Now, this 5-bout deal carried him into 2012, in which a third agreement was made, in which there will be a agreement made that didn't expire until 3 years after the first fight, which that first fight didn't take place until September of 2012. I believe that's the Chad Dawson fight. The Chad Dawson fight was the first fight of the last agreement that he made with Goossen. Now, if you count 3 years from September of 2012, you're looking at September 2015, in which Andre Ward believes will carry over into 2016. So evidently, these are the deals that Andre Ward set up with Dan Goossen. It was approved by Goossen. It was approved by Ward. It was approved by Ward's team, his manager, his lawyers. It was approved by Goossen's lawyers. Everyone who was supposed to approve this thing approved this thing. Comes last year, for some crazy reason, I guess Andre Ward started to realize how much money that fighters like Floyd Mayweather, all the Al Heyman fighters, which that's my remedy, and I'll state it at the end of this video. But all the Heyman fighters, he gets a glimpse of what they're making. He got a glimpse of what Chavez Jr. is making. He gets a glimpse of what Manny Pacquiao is making. He gets a glimpse of what the Timothy Bradleys are making. And he's sitting back looking at himself like, what the fuck? I am the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Not Vladimir Klitschko, not Danny Garcia, who sits atop of his division. No, not Floyd. Floyd's number 1. Not Canelo Alvarez. I am the number 1 fighter the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and I'm getting shit checks. That's how he's looking at this thing. It's all about money, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone who tells you anything otherwise is full of bullshit. You know what I mean? Now, I'm like Virgil Hunter. I don't like to get into another man's finances because that's his own personal business. But he puts this business out for the world to know. And if we're going to talk about boxing, we have to talk about this, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the fact of the matter is, Andre Ward, like I said, as of last year, decided he wants to get the fuck out of this Dan Goossen debacle that he involved himself in, of not making no money, of not being able to fill arenas, of not getting the big venues, ladies and gentlemen. So what happened is that he filed a suit back in June of 2013, in which he lost in LA Superior Court. And I believe that was just seemed like a whole nother case. It has nothing to, it's a totally different case. At that time, he was suing Goossen's promotional company, in which a former Ward camp member, Mr. Antonio Leonard, claimed that him and Dan Goossen had a verbal agreement that he will also co-promote Andre Ward, and then this agreement was not reported to the California State Athletic Commission, so this made the contract null and void. That's the defense that Andre Ward and his camp was using. However, that fell through the cracks. The judge didn't take that shit. So they took that same exact lawsuit and went down to Houston, Texas, and tried to file this same exact lawsuit. This guy, Antonio Leonard, still has his lawsuit on the books and waiting for a decision. But then what makes this thing so awkward is that during that, Andre Ward goes back to LA and files another suit. However, this time he's not suing the promotional company. He's suing Dan Goossen directly, stating that basically, he there's a law that Oscar De La Hoya used back in 2001 of that the state of California, you can't provide personal services, contractual services to someone for longer than 7 years. That's just the rule. Now, Andre Ward is stating that even though he had 3 different agreements, this just seems like one continuous agreement, and this agreement has lasted well over 9 years, which is past the 7 years that the state allows for personal service. Now, Oscar De La Hoya won his case back in 2001. Take in mind, this case was against top-ranked boxing, Bob Arum and them. You know what I'm saying? But Oscar De La Hoya won, but there were major differences between Oscar De La Hoya's case and Andre Ward's case. Oscar De La Hoya's case, actually, he was just talking about one agreement, not 3 separate agreements. You know, the Andre Ward's agreements were signed on 3 separate occasions. Oscar only signed on 1 occasion and extended that thing. And, you know, but that's the main difference. Also, a difference is that in Oscar's case, it involved 2 states. This wasn't a binding thing to the state of California. This also included different jurisdictions such as California and New York. In Ward's case, it's just California. A lot of people are predicting, Ward, you're going to fuck around and lose this fight and be stuck into this contract up until 2015, possibly even 2016, ladies and gentlemen. So, you know, it's rumored that Ward really wants to get out of this contract, hopefully to align himself with Top Rank Boxing, because that's who Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is signed under, and he would love to get the Chavez Jr. fight, especially since Chavez Jr. is fighting at 168 now. You know, his upcoming fight against possibly Gennady Golovkin will take place at 168 because Chavez Jr. is having extreme problems in making the 160 weight, as you can see with the Brian Vera fight he's just coming off. He's constantly coming in overweight at 160, so he's up at 168 in Ward's territory, yet and still, you know, he's not calling Ward out in any kind of way. I don't know if he knows about his legal problems or what the fuck. But the fact of the matter is, man, we are being deprived, ladies and gentlemen, of a great, great boxer. The kid is now, what, 29 years old, if not 30 years old by now. He doesn't have much longer in his prime years, ladies and gentlemen. We've seen this with Muhammad Ali during his time in fighting when he was taken out of boxing for 3 years during his prime years. It seems as if this is Andre Ward's window. This window is not going to be open forever, ladies and gentlemen. So what does Andre Ward do? What does he do? Some people say he needs to stay there, sweat it out. You know, fuck that. You know what I mean? Just get it on to 2015 and do what you got to do. But at that time, ladies and gentlemen, that's a whole year from now. We don't know how Andre Ward just can't sit out an entire year this year and then try to come back next year, especially given that he's already set out for what, 2.5 years, you know, total time thus far. These years are that time he's going to get back, ladies and gentlemen. So what does Andre Ward do? What does Andre Ward do? There's only one sure fix, and it's called Mr. Al Haymon. Now, I'm a fan of the sport, and I would hate to even recommend that. Lord knows I do. But for the sake of Andre Ward and his well-being and his financial future and the locking of his family, maybe you need to give Al Haymon a call, my friend. I mean, shit. I mean, I know you probably stuck in the contract thing now, but you know, if you go back in Al Haymon's past, he's gotten people out of contracts. I don't know if he wants you, because a lot of people say, like I said before, you're a pretty average, boring, class act type guy. You're not a flamboyant. You're not an Adrian Bronner. You're not a Floyd Mayweather. You're not the one flamboyant. You're a class act, but you are what the sports needs. So what does Andre Ward do, ladies and gentlemen? Does he sign with Haymon? Does he just sweat it out in his current deal that he's in? I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, he's still number 2 pound for pound in the world. But how long is he going to sit at that position, given that his inactivity in fighting, ladies and gentlemen? You know, I don't know. I honestly do not know. But that is the curious case of Andre Ward. And it really saddens me to even have to talk about this, because the man is a great, great boxer, and he could have been so much more with the right team. I don't get it. I don't know if I fought Goosen or if I fought Ward, to be honest with you, because you got to ask yourself, why in the hell is Ward constantly signing different agreements for someone he wants to sue? If he didn't make you any money in the first 5 years, or better yet, the first damn near 10 years, why in the hell you going to sign back with him? I mean, you sign a 5 bout deals with him and then turn around and sign another deal that doesn't end to 3 years later. Why did you sign it if he's not making you the money that you want? You just wake up in 2013 and look at all the purses that these fighters are making and say, huh, I want that too. What? You should have decided that years ago. So I don't know if to fault him for it or just say Goossen is just wrong for just taking advantage of not paying Andre Ward, his prize fighter, his prize possession, the #2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, is not getting them respectable purses. I don't know who to fault in this thing. It's a curious fucking case. It really is. But whatever the case may be, we are being deprived, ladies and gentlemen, of one of the best talents on the planet in the sport of boxing today, Andre Ward. So I hope they do get it together, because I would love to see Andre Ward versus Chavez Jr. If he can get the winner of the Chavez Jr. Triple G fight, if it goes down, that'd be awesome. If he could possibly get a rematch with Carl Froch, if he comes off a win with George Groves, that would be awesome. I recall Andre Ward trying to get the George Groves fight prior to the Froch rematch, but that would even be awesome. You know what I mean? We just want to see Andre Ward back in the ring. All right, before his best years are behind him. Because I do not want him to come back into the ring rusting, but he stays in tip-top condition and just comes back looking horrible and just tarnishes his legacy due to inactivity. But how long do we continuously give him pound for pound #2? Due to inactivity. If he doesn't fight this year, ladies and gentlemen, there's a serious conversation that needs to be had about Andre Ward at pound for pound #2. I mean, I think so. There's other fighters out here that are dominating their divisions, that are sitting up on top of their divisions, and they need a second look. Due to inactivity, not due to lack of skill, not due to the lack of fighting credible opponents in Andre Ward's case, none of that, just due to inactivity. So, what do you guys think? What should Andre Ward do? Till your next video, ladies and gentlemen, it's your main man, Made Man, and I see y'all then. And also, don't forget to subscribe. Peace out.